It was a typical Tuesday night in Middletown, a small town in Pennsylvania where nothing ever seemed to change. The kind of town where people knew each other's names, their stories, and their routines. The streets were quiet, bathed in the orange glow of streetlights that flickered to life as the sun set behind the hills. The Copper Bell, an old bar at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, sat nestled in the heart of town. It wasn't fancy, and it certainly wasn't glamorous, but it was home. Behind the counter, Lena Carter, a woman in her early 30s, wiped down a set of empty glasses. Her movements were smooth, almost mechanical, as she worked through the familiar motions. She had been a waitress at the Copper Bell for the better part of 5 years. Most nights, she blended into the background, unnoticed. She was never the center of attention, and that was just the way she liked it. Her life was simple: wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. There was a quiet comfort in the monotony of it all. But lately, Lena felt something stirring deep inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. Something was changing.
It wasn't supposed to be like this. The air felt different tonight, thick with something that Lena couldn't put her finger on. As she wiped down the counter, her movements seemed automatic, mechanical. The chatter in the bar grew louder, and the noise of clinking glasses mixed with bursts of laughter. But something was off. She couldn't shake the feeling that tonight wasn't just another typical evening. Tommy Bones Malone and his crew had been there for over an hour, and Lena noticed something that she hadn't before. It wasn't just their loud voices or the way they commanded attention. No, there was something deeper at play here. Something darker. The regulars at the bar seemed uncomfortable around them. Dave, the retired cop, had exchanged uneasy glances with Maggie. Even Ted, the mechanic, had stopped cracking jokes, his gaze fixed on Tommy's crew like a hawk watching prey. Lena had tried her best to ignore them, but as the night dragged on, she couldn't help but feel the weight of their presence. Every time Tommy looked at her, it felt like he was measuring her, like he was trying to figure out what made her tick. For the first time in a long time, Lena couldn't focus on the routine of her shift. Her mind kept drifting back to the moment earlier, when Tommy had torn her shirt open. The tattoo. The symbol of a past that she had buried so deep she thought no one would ever find out. But now they had. Tommy's crew wasn't just a group of bikers. They were an infamous gang in Pennsylvania, known for their rough ways and their ability to stir up trouble wherever they went. They had a reputation. And tonight, they were in Middletown, making their mark on a place that rarely saw outsiders. Lena had seen men like Tommy before. They came into the bar, acted like they owned the place, and left without a second thought. But Tommy wasn't like the others. There was something about him that made Lena uneasy. It wasn't just his size or the tattoos covering his arms. It was the way he carried himself, like he had been through hell and back, and there was nothing that could shake him. She could feel it in her bones. Tonight was different. Her hand tightened around the glass she was wiping. What was Tommy after? The sound of the door opening snapped Lena out of her thoughts. It was another biker, Benny, a younger guy with a patch over one eye. He was carrying a few more drinks for the crew, and as he approached the bar, his eyes locked on Lena.
The quiet hum of conversation echoed in the copper bell. The bar, which usually felt like a second home to Lena, now felt alien. It was no longer the place where she worked without thinking, where she could hide behind the anonymity of a waitress. Tonight, everything felt different. The regulars sat at their usual spots, their conversations muffled, as if everyone was too aware of the shifting atmosphere. Lena kept her back to them, focusing on the bottles she was cleaning, but she could feel their eyes on her, their uncomfortable glances. She glanced over her shoulder. Tommy and his crew were seated at the far end of the bar, their laughter loud and jarring against the otherwise subdued murmurs of the locals. But it wasn't the noise that made her uneasy. It was the way Tommy was watching her. His gaze had softened, but there was something in it now, something almost predatory, and it made Lena's skin crawl. The night dragged on, and Lena could feel the eyes of the crew on her, their attention unsettling. Tommy, ever the leader, seemed to have no interest in anyone else but her. Each time she walked by, his gaze followed her like a shadow. He wasn't just watching her, he was studying her. The regulars had stopped talking, and the air in the bar had become thick with something that couldn't be named. Lena kept herself busy. She moved quickly, refilling drinks, cleaning tables, pretending to focus on the task at hand. But she couldn't shake the growing sense of discomfort. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in her bones. And then, like a storm breaking, Tommy's voice broke the silence. "Lena," he called, his voice sharp and loud enough for everyone in the bar to look in his direction. The room fell silent instantly. Lena froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. "Come here." Tommy's command was simple, but there was a sharp edge to it. Lena swallowed hard but didn't move immediately. She could feel every eye in the room on her, the weight of their gaze heavy and intrusive. This wasn't just any order. It was a test, a challenge. Taking a deep breath, she slowly walked toward him, her feet dragging against the worn floorboards, as though each step took more effort than the last. She reached Tommy's table, and without a word, she placed the drink she had just poured in front of him. Tommy didn't acknowledge her immediately. He was staring into his drink, swirling it in his glass, as if lost in thought. For a moment, Lena wondered if he had forgotten about her. Maybe he had grown bored of the game. Maybe, just maybe, she could escape this night unscathed. Then Tommy's voice broke through the stillness again. "You know, Lena, you remind me of someone." His tone was light, almost casual. "Someone I used to know." Lena's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a conversation she wanted to have. "I don't know what you mean." Her voice was calm, but she could feel the tension building inside her. Tommy's eyes finally lifted from his glass, locking onto hers. His smile was slow, predatory. "Oh, I think you do." Before Lena could respond, Tommy reached out, grabbing the sleeve of her shirt with a force that surprised her. He yanked her closer, pulling her into the space between their bodies. The sudden motion made Lena's pulse race, but she refused to let him see her fear. "I think you've been hiding something from me." Tommy's voice was low, dangerous. "Something that would make this whole bar look at you differently." Lena could feel the eyes of the room on her, their stares like daggers. She wanted to pull away, but Tommy's grip was strong. He wasn't going to let go. Not until he got what he wanted. For a moment, Lena considered running, but she knew it was too late for that. Tommy had already cornered her, and he wasn't going to stop until he got the answers he was after. She had to play along. For now, at least. Tommy's grip loosened slightly, and Lena took a breath. She didn't speak, but in that moment she knew what he was after. He wanted to uncover her past, to expose the one thing she had fought so hard to keep hidden. The tattoo, the one that tied her to a past she couldn't escape. And for the first time, Lena was faced with the real possibility that it wasn't just Tommy who would learn the truth. The entire bar could find out. "What's your story, Lena?" Tommy's voice was cold now, calculated. "Why do you hide behind this quiet little persona? Why not let the world see who you really are?"
The words felt like a challenge. He wasn't just asking a question, he was daring her to reveal herself. He wanted her to break, to give in to the pressure. Lena met his gaze, her expression hardening. There was no way in hell she was going to let Tommy see her crack. Not now, not ever. But something in the way he looked at her made her wonder if he already knew more than he was letting on. Tommy leaned forward, his face inches from hers. His breath was warm against her cheek. You know, Lena, it's almost a shame that someone like you hides so much. His voice softened, and for a moment, he almost seemed sympathetic. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Lena clenched her fists at her sides. I don't have anything to hide. Tommy's smile returned, but this time it was darker. He straightened in his chair and looked around at the room of quiet onlookers. I think that's something we can all agree on. The air in the bar had shifted. The tension was suffocating, thick with unspoken words. The regulars were still watching, their eyes flicking between Lena and Tommy, unsure what to do. Lena's heart raced in her chest as she tried to steady herself. She had no idea what Tommy was going to do next, but one thing was certain, he wasn't done with her, and neither was the crowd. They had been waiting for a show, and tonight they were going to get one. Tommy's crew exchanged looks, whispering amongst themselves. The laughter had died down, replaced with an unsettling quiet that hung over the room like a storm cloud. Tommy stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair. The loud clatter echoed in the room, and Lena flinched. Tommy moved toward the center of the bar, his eyes never leaving hers. He was testing her, pushing her boundaries, seeing how far she would go before she cracked. What's it gonna be, Lena? His voice was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Are you going to stand your ground, or are you gonna let me tear your world apart? For a moment, Lena considered running, but she knew she couldn't. She had already come too far. And then, as if the tension had reached its breaking point, Tommy dropped a bombshell. I know what you're hiding, and I think the rest of this town deserves to know, don't you? What would you do if you were in Lena's shoes? Subscribe to find out what happens next. You won't want to miss what's coming next.
The room was frozen in time. The copper bell had never felt more still, more suffocating. The heavy silence hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Lena stood there, her back stiff, heart racing, as Tommy's words echoed in her mind. I know what you're hiding, and I think the rest of this town deserves to know. Don't you? The nerve in her body screamed for her to move, to flee, but she stood still. She had been cornered, trapped by the one thing she had worked so hard to hide from the world, her past. Around her, the regulars remained silent, their eyes wide, watching the drama unfold before them. Dave, Maggie, and Ted, all of them were looking at Lena with a mix of confusion, curiosity, and perhaps a hint of disbelief. They had no idea what Tommy was referring to, but they knew it was something significant. The tension was palpable, hanging over the bar like an unspoken promise that something was about to change. Tommy stood a few feet away, his posture confident, almost smug. His eyes gleamed with a challenge, daring Lena to make the next move. His crew watched with growing anticipation, waiting for the next act in this strange, twisted drama. Lena felt the weight of their gaze. The eyes of everyone in the room seemed to bear down on her. The noise of the bar, the music, the laughter, the chatter had all but vanished. All that remained was this moment. Tommy was daring her to break, daring her to let her secret slip, but Lena wasn't going to let that happen. Tommy took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. The air felt thicker with every movement he made, every breath he took. He was still smiling, but there was something more behind that smile now, something darker. Come on, Lena. He leaned in closer, his voice almost a whisper. What's the matter? You don't want to tell them? Lena stood there, her back stiff, heart racing, as Tommy's words echoed in her mind. I know what you're hiding, and I think the rest of this town deserves to know. Don't you? The nerve in her body screamed for her to move, to flee, but she stood still.
She had been cornered, trapped by the one thing she had worked so hard to hide from the world, her past.
The bar had never felt so cold. The warmth of the regulars' chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the usual hum of background noise were gone. Lena stood there, her heart still racing. The echo of Tommy's words were reverberating in her mind. She's a fighter. She's a warrior. Her past was no longer a whisper she could ignore. It had been exposed to everyone in that room, the soldier beneath the waitress, the woman who had faced battles that no one in this bar could ever understand. Lena's mind wandered back to that first day she had walked into the Copper Bell so many years ago. She had been running from something, but what exactly was she running from? She had spent years building a life that was as far removed from the woman she used to be as possible. No one knew the horrors she had witnessed, the battles she had fought, the friends she had lost. To them, she was just the quiet waitress who didn't make waves, who kept to herself. But the truth, her truth, was far from that. Lena turned away from the bar and walked toward the back of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She needed space, she needed to breathe. But as soon as her hand reached for the door to the back office, she heard a voice. Dave's. "Lena, we need to talk." Dave had been one of the few who hadn't stared at her differently since Tommy's reveal. He had always been protective of her in his own quiet way. He knew that she wasn't just some ordinary woman who walked into the bar every day. She had stories that even he couldn't guess at. Lena turned to face him. His face was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her pause. "I know you don't want to talk about it." Dave's voice was low, cautious. "But I need you to know that whatever happened, we're still here." Lena shook her head. "You don't know the whole story, Dave." Dave stepped closer, his hand resting on the counter. "I've seen enough to know that there's more to you than what you show." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to tell him, she wanted to tell someone, anyone, about everything she had gone through, but she couldn't. The pain was too fresh, and even if she did speak, would anyone truly understand? "It's not like that." Her voice broke, and she quickly wiped the tear that threatened to escape. "I don't know how to explain it, Dave. Not to anyone, not even to myself." There was a long pause. Dave didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The silence was filled with the weight of years of unspoken words, hidden pain, and buried memories. "You don't have to tell me anything, Lena," Dave finally said, his voice gentle, "but I want you to know something." Lena looked up, meeting his gaze. "You don't have to face this alone." For a moment, Lena felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A connection. Someone cared. It had been so long since she had let anyone close enough to care. But even that small flicker of warmth quickly died out as the weight of her memories came rushing back. The truth was something she couldn't escape. She stood alone in the barren desert, the wind biting at her face as the sun set behind the mountains. She was in Afghanistan, miles from home, and the only sound was the howling wind and the soft hum of the radio tucked in her vest. The air was thick with the smell of dust and sweat, the sounds of gunfire and shouting faint in the distance. She and her squad had been out for days, patrolling, watching, waiting, but tonight something felt off. She could feel it in her gut. "Lena, get down!" The shout broke her out of her reverie. She ducked instinctively, diving behind the nearest cover, a rock formation just ahead of her. She could hear the soft thrum of a helicopter overhead, its blades cutting through the thick air, but it was a distraction. The enemy was near. Her heart pounded as she readied her rifle. The adrenaline shot through her veins like a surge of electricity, making every sense sharpen. Her fingers tightened on the trigger, and she waited, her breath coming fast, steady, as she tried to slow her racing thoughts. A flash of movement caught her eye. The silhouette of a man, a shadow against the evening sky. Without thinking, Lena fired. The shot rang out, echoing across the empty desert. The man fell to the ground, motionless. Lena felt a twist in her stomach, as the reality of what she had just done sunk in. She had killed him. But there was no time to dwell on the consequences. The rest of the squad had already moved out, preparing to return to base. There was always another mission, another day, another fight. Months had passed since that night in the desert, but the image of that man, the man she had killed, haunted her. It wasn't the battle itself that hurt the most. It was the aftermath. The things she had witnessed, the deaths, the blood. The faces of the fallen soldiers, both comrades and strangers. And the silence that followed each battle, each death, was deafening. It was the sound of her own mind, racing, never stopping. Lena had tried to keep herself together, but the nightmares came, uninvited, relentless. The faces of the dead haunted her dreams. The sound of gunfire echoed in her ears long after the battle was over. And it was in the quiet, in the stillness of her own thoughts, that the true scars of war emerged. Lena hadn't just left the military. She had run. The pain, the guilt, the memories, it was too much. So she left. She ran to the only place she knew, back home to Middletown, where no one would ask questions. At first it was easy. The quiet life of a waitress allowed her to slip under the radar, to hide in plain sight. But it wasn't long before the memories caught up to her. They always did. Now here she is, her past exposed, her secret tattoo, the symbol of everything she had tried to forget, on full display for everyone to see. Lena could feel the weight of the room on her again. Her confession, though only in her mind, had somehow made its way into the air. Her story had begun to unravel, and now there was no turning back. She could hear Tommy's voice mocking her, taunting her, but it didn't matter. What mattered now was the truth about who she had been and who she is now. But could anyone accept her for who she was? Could she even accept herself? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice, Maggie's. "Lena, it's okay. You don't have to explain it all now, but we're here for you." Lena felt her chest tighten as the weight of her emotions pressed down on her. She hadn't expected this, not from Maggie, not from anyone, but it was enough to make her realize that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. Lena wiped the tears from her eyes, looking around at the faces of the regulars in the bar. She had spent so many years hiding from the truth, from the people who might love her despite it. But maybe it was time to stop running. With her back straight, she met Tommy's gaze again. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation. "I don't need your approval, Tommy." Her voice was strong, steady. "I've fought battles you could never understand, and I'm still standing." Tommy stared at her, his smirk faltering as he saw the strength in her eyes. For a moment, he didn't look so sure of himself. Subscribe to find out what happens next. You won't want.
The atmosphere in the Copper Bell had changed. The energy in the bar was thick, suffocating, and for the first time in a long time, Lena felt completely exposed. She had expected Tommy's reaction to her tattoo, his mocking words, his cruel smirk, but what she didn't expect was the silence that followed. The silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Everyone in the room was still, waiting, watching, waiting for someone to speak, to break the tension that hung like a heavy cloud. The regulars shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Tommy's crew, who had been so boisterous just hours before, now seemed like a different kind of force altogether. Silent, calculating, unnervingly quiet. Lena stood at the bar, her back straight, heart still pounding, but this time she didn't look away. Her past had been exposed, but in that moment, she felt more in control than she ever had before. Tommy's eyes locked with hers, and for the first time, she saw something different in them. Something other than arrogance or amusement. There was something raw, something almost vulnerable hidden beneath the surface of that hardened exterior. Was this a game to him, or had he crossed a line he hadn't expected to? Tommy had been in control of the situation from the moment he walked into the Copper Bell. He had been playing with Lena, pulling her into his world where she was nothing more than a pawn in his game. But now, as he looked into her eyes, he could see the defiance there, the unwavering strength in her that no one had anticipated. Lena had always been more than she appeared, and Tommy realized that now. It was a bitter truth he didn't want to face, but it was there, unavoidable, undeniable. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. "What's your story, Tommy?" Lena's voice cut through the silence, steady and calm. Tommy's lips pressed into a tight line, and for a moment he looked like he might say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, his gaze faltered, and he stepped back slightly, his tough guy facade cracking just enough for Lena to see a flash of something beneath it. Regret. It was only for a second, but it was enough. Lena saw it, and she knew that the moment had changed. Something had shifted between them. But what? And why? Tommy finally spoke, but his voice wasn't the confident, mocking tone that had filled the room earlier. This time his words were quieter, heavier with a weight Lena hadn't expected. "I've done a lot of things I regret, Lena." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual bravado. "More than I can count." Lena raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued, but she remained silent, letting Tommy speak on his own. "I've hurt people. I've crossed lines I shouldn't have." Tommy's eyes shifted to the floor as if the weight of his own words was too much to bear. "But there's one thing I never expected. I never expected you." Lena's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the Tommy she had seen earlier, the man who had walked into the bar with confidence and authority. This was someone else, someone with a past he wasn't proud of. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, watching him, letting him open up in his own time. "I was in the Marines." Tommy's voice cracked, and for a moment it sounded like he might break. "I've seen things, done things I can't take back." Lena's breath caught in her throat. The Marines. It was a place she knew all too well. She had been in the military, and she understood the weight of that experience, the weight of being a soldier. The things you saw, the things you did, and the scars they left behind. Tommy's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw the man behind the biker, a man who had been through hell and was still trying to figure out how to survive it. "I didn't want to be this guy." Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes clouded with regret. "But here I am, still trying to figure out who I am." Lena could feel her heart soften in spite of herself. Tommy wasn't just the tough biker. He was a man broken by his past, just like her. And in that moment, she understood him more than she ever had before. Lena stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with an understanding she hadn't expected to feel. "You can't keep running, Tommy." Her voice was calm, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "You have to face your past." Tommy looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he seemed to shrink, his earlier bravado vanishing completely, as if Lena's words had reached him in a way that nothing else had before. "I don't know how to face it." Tommy's voice was barely audible now, his eyes clouded with regret. "I've done things I can't undo." Lena placed a hand on his shoulder, surprising both of them. "No one can undo the past, Tommy." Her voice softened, "but you can choose who you are today." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, a bridge being built between two people who had been strangers just hours before. But were they really strangers? Or had their paths crossed for a reason? Tommy stood there for a long moment, his head lowered, his breath slow and steady. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost distant. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I can change. But I don't know if I'll ever be the man you think I am." Lena smiled softly, the first real smile she had shown that night. "Maybe it's not about being who you think I am. Maybe it's about being who you want to be." Tommy's lips parted slightly, as if he were about to say something more, but before he could say anything more, the door of the park creaked open. A figure stepped inside, breaking the moment.
The night felt longer than it should. The copper bell was quieter than usual, the familiar hum of conversation muted by the heavy emotions that lingered in the air. Lena stood at the bar, her fingers wrapped around a glass, staring into the dark liquid that swirled before her. The events of the last few hours played over and over in her mind like a broken record. Tommy's confession, his vulnerability, the rawness in his eyes. He had revealed a side of himself that no one had seen before, but there was still so much unspoken between them. The bar had returned to its usual rhythm, but Lena felt like she had just stepped out of one world and into another. Her past, the one that she had buried so deep, was now exposed to the people who had once known her as the quiet waitress. But it wasn't just her past that she was running from. It was the fear of what they would think. Would the people in the bar, the people she had trusted, look at her differently now? Would they see her as the soldier she had been or the woman she had become? Her mind raced, but she couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that she was being watched. Her eyes flicked to the regulars: Dave, Maggie, Ted. All of them seemed to be waiting for something. But what? Were they waiting for her to break? For her to fall apart? Lena took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of it all. She had already survived the war, survived the nightmares, the scars, the loneliness. But this was different. The war had never really left her. It wasn't the battles themselves or the soldiers she had fought beside. It was the silence that followed, the empty nights when the adrenaline faded and the memories crept in, dragging her under. The first time she had been deployed, Lena was terrified. But fear was something she had learned to hide, to bury beneath the armor she wore. The strength she had built, the woman everyone saw at the bar, the waitress who moved through the night with precision, was all built on the broken pieces of that first deployment. But over time, the armor had cracked. The nightmares returned, haunting her sleep and her waking hours. She'd lost too many friends, too many good people who never made it back. They were gone, and the only thing she had left was the tattoo on her arm. It wasn't just ink. It was a constant reminder of everything she had lost, everything she had fought for, and everything she couldn't change. Her fingers traced the edges of the tattoo, the ink still fresh in her mind, even if it had been years since she had joined the Army Rangers. The memory of the battlefield, the deafening sound of gunfire, the smell of smoke, the feeling of losing something that could never be recovered was still as vivid as the day it happened. Lena! Her thoughts were interrupted by Maggie's voice. Lena blinked, snapping out of her reverie. Maggie stood just a few feet away, her face unreadable but soft, like she understood more than she was letting on. Lena straightened, forcing a smile. Yeah? Maggie didn't return the smile. She simply stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the conversation needed to remain private. You don't have to keep running, you know. Lena's chest tightened. She had tried to keep the walls up, tried to hide the truth from Maggie, from everyone. But the cracks were starting to show, and Lena wasn't sure if she was ready for the flood that might come. I'm not running. Lena's voice was firm, but her insides betrayed her. She was running. From everything. From the war, from the people who would judge her, from the guilt. You don't have to carry this alone. Maggie's words were quiet, but insistent. We're here for you, Lena. The words hit her harder than she expected. Lena didn't know how to let people in. Not after everything. Not after the things she had done, the things she had seen. But something in Maggie's gaze, something gentle, understanding, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. As the night wore on, Lena's mind continued to spiral. But it wasn't just the pressure of being exposed. It was something deeper, something she had buried under layers of self-doubt and fear. What if they didn't accept her? What if Tommy's words were true? What if she wasn't just a waitress, but something more, something dangerous, something broken? She tried to shake the thought away, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't. The pain of her past was right there, sitting just below the surface, waiting to break free. Lena looked at the group of regulars, the people she had served for years, the ones who had watched her with silent understanding. They weren't just faces she saw day after day. They were a part of her, whether she wanted them to be or not. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about her. She had to face her past. She couldn't keep running. Lena, can I get a refill? Dave's voice broke the silence, and Lena turned to him, her face hardening into a mask of calm. Sure. She moved quickly, shaking off the tension in her shoulders as she grabbed the bottle and filled his glass. The motion was familiar, soothing. It wasn't much, but for a brief moment, it was enough. As she turned away, she saw Tommy watching her from the far end of the bar. His gaze was softer now, but still intense. He was waiting. Lena couldn't avoid him forever. It wasn't until after closing time that Lena found herself face to face with Tommy again. The bar was empty, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Lena was wiping down the counter, but she knew Tommy was there. She could feel his presence,
the weight of it pressing down on her. "You want to talk?" Tommy's voice was quiet, almost gentle. It was a stark contrast to the man who had barged into her life earlier that evening. Lena didn't look up immediately. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected this. The softness in his tone, the vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't know what to say to you," Lena finally replied, her voice low. "I didn't ask for any of this." Tommy stepped closer, his boots muffled against the floor. "You don't have to say anything." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I just want to know if you're okay." The question hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay for a long time, but no one had ever asked her that before. No one had cared enough to ask. "I'm not okay." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most honest thing she had said all night. "I don't think I ever will be." Tommy didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching her with a quiet understanding that made Lena feel like maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of understanding, an acknowledgement of the pain both of them carried. Lena looked at Tommy, and for the first time, she saw him not as the biker, not as the man who had exposed her secret, but as a person who had his own scars. "I can't promise things will get better, Lena." Tommy's voice was soft but steady. "But I'm here. I'll be here." Lena felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a small glimmer of hope maybe. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Thank you," Lena whispered, her voice breaking as she spoke. Can people change, or are they stuck in their past? Encourages viewers to comment, sparking conversation and interaction. If you want to see what happens next and how Lena continues to confront her past, subscribe now. This story is far from over.
The air in the copper bell had settled into something heavy and tense. The usual hum of casual conversations was missing, replaced by the soft clinking of glasses and the low murmur of people trying to process what had just happened. Lena, standing at the far end of the bar, felt like the eyes of the entire room were on her, though no one was speaking to her directly. Her secret was no longer a secret. Tommy had made sure of that. Tommy's confession, the rawness of it, still echoed in her mind. "You make me want to change." Those words kept circling around, hitting her in unexpected waves. What did they mean? Could he really change? Or was it just another fleeting moment of vulnerability, an emotional blip on the radar of his life? For a brief moment, Lena thought she could see through the layers of who Tommy was. She thought she could understand his past, his regrets, his struggles. But now, as she stood in the quiet of the bar, she wasn't so sure. Could someone like him really change? Her mind couldn't rest. The nights had been the hardest, and now, with Tommy's revelation hanging in the air, Lena couldn't sleep. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. Not the quiet waitress, not the soldier, and certainly not the woman Tommy seemed to want to fix. She was caught between the past and the present, torn between what she had done and what she was now capable of becoming. But no matter how much she'd tried to bury it, the truth was there, rising to the surface. Her life was no longer just hers.
Lena had never liked surprises. They always felt like disruptions, like something out of her control. The routine of the copper bell was something she had come to cherish over the years. It was a predictable comfort, a place where she could hide behind the counter, where she could be anonymous and unassuming. But tonight, the door swung open and everything she had carefully built came crashing down. The bell above the door jingled softly as the figure stepped inside. A man. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and something about his posture immediately made Lena's heart skip a beat. It wasn't just the fact that he looked out of place. It was the fact that his face seemed so familiar. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she met his eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a split second, the world around her seemed to slow. Eli. She knew him immediately. She hadn't seen him since he was a baby. Her son. The son she had given up years ago. The son she had lost in the shuffle of military service and the broken promises that had followed. His eyes locked onto hers with a mixture of confusion and determination. He looked almost nothing like the boy she remembered. He was taller now, older, but the features were still unmistakable. The way his eyes shone with a mixture of sadness and hope. The same eyes that had haunted her dreams for years. And then, before she could say anything, he spoke. "Mom?" The word hit her like a punch to the gut. Mom. The word she had longed to hear for so many years, the word she had never expected to come from this boy. The boy who had been taken from her when she left for war. The boy who had been placed into another family's arms while she was out of reach, too far gone in her own pain to even imagine him growing up without her. The room fell silent. The regulars, the people who had watched her come and go for years, were now watching the scene unfold before them. They could sense the weight of the moment, but they couldn't understand it. Not yet. Lena stood frozen, her heart racing. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Eli took a few tentative steps toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm sorry, Eli." Lena finally managed to whisper his name. The sound of it felt foreign, like a distant memory she had long abandoned. But now it was a reality that crashed into her with the force of a freight train. Lena opened her mouth to say something more, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to explain the years of silence, the years of separation, or the fact that she had never stopped thinking about him. Tommy, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the bar, stood up. The tension in the air thickened as he slowly approached Lena and Eli. His footsteps were heavy, purposeful, but when he reached them, he didn't say a word. He just stood there, his presence oddly comforting. Lena felt his eyes on her, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from her son. Eli's voice broke the silence again, this time softer, almost hesitant. "I've been looking for you for a long time." Lena's heart clenched. All these years, she had thought of him every single day, but she hadn't known how to find him. She hadn't known how to make things right. But now, he was here, in front of her. The son she had never forgotten, and the one person she thought she had lost forever. "I know I'm not the kid you remember. I've been through a lot." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. All the years of guilt, the feeling of failure that had weighed her down like a lead blanket, suddenly became too much. She reached out toward Eli, but stopped short, her hand trembling in the air. "I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked as the words finally escaped her lips. "I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean for you to grow up without me." Eli shook his head slowly, his eyes softening. "You don't have to explain. I get it. I know it wasn't your choice. But I want to know you. I need to know who you are now." For the first time in years, Lena felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could still be the mother he needed. Maybe she could still be the person he could rely on. I'm here now, Lena whispered, her voice breaking. I'll never leave you again. Lena's mind swirled with the memories of her time in the military. She could remember the day she had received the call that her son had been placed into another family's care. The decision had been made for her. She had been too deep in the chaos of war, too consumed by the fear and the violence to think of anything else. The military had taken everything from her, her family, her identity, and the one thing that had meant the most to her, her son. But the truth was, Lena had been running from herself for a long time, from the guilt of leaving Eli behind, from the weight of the things she had done during her service. She had spent so many years trying to move forward, to forget the past, to build a new life. But now the past had come crashing back into her life, in the form of a young man who had become a stranger in her absence. Eli had grown up in foster care, bouncing from one family to another, never really finding a place where he felt like he belonged. But now, he was standing in front of her asking for the one thing she had feared she could never give him: her love, her forgiveness, her presence. Lena took a deep breath, steadying herself. She was no longer the woman who had fled her past. She was no longer the soldier running from the memories of war. She was Lena, and she was ready to face the consequences of her choices. Lena, I can't change what happened. Lena's voice was firm, but there was a warmth to it now, a strength that hadn't been there before. But I can promise you this: I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here for you. Eli stepped forward, a tentative smile pulling at the corners of his lips. I never wanted to feel like I was a burden. His voice cracked slightly, but there was hope there now, too. But I want to get to know you. I want to know the woman you are now. Lena nodded, the tears finally spilling over. You're not a burden, Eli. You're my son, and I'll never leave you again. For the first time, Lena felt the weight of her past begin to lift. They could start over. They could begin to rebuild what had been lost. The conversation between mother and son didn't end that night. It was just the beginning. There was so much left unsaid, so much that needed to be addressed. But for now, Lena and Eli had each other, and that was enough. Tommy, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, stood up, his voice soft but firm. You've got a second chance, Lena. Don't waste it. Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I won't. And for the first time, she felt like she was truly beginning to heal. Her past, while painful, was no longer something that defined her. She was Lena, a woman who had faced the darkest parts of herself and emerged stronger on the other side. What would you do if you were separated from your child for years? If you want to see how Lena and Eli continue their journey together, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next.
The storm had passed. The chaos, the tension, the raw confessions and painful truths. They had all come to an unexpected standstill. The air in the Copper Bell felt different now. It wasn't lighter, but it was something else entirely. It was full of possibilities. Lena stood behind the bar, wiping down glasses that had already been cleaned twice over. Her body moved on autopilot, the motions familiar but distant. Her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the emotional whirlwind that had overtaken her in the past few weeks. Eli, her son, was out there. After all these years of wondering, of imagining what he was like, he was real. He wasn't just a memory from a past she couldn't escape. He was her future. And in some way, he had given her a chance to be the mother she always wanted to be. But it wasn't just Eli that had changed things. Tommy, the man who had walked into her life like a storm, had become something else too. A friend, maybe more. Someone who had shown her what it meant to face her past and still move forward. Someone who had forgiven himself enough to help her do the same. The door opened, and Lena didn't need to look up to know who it was. Tommy had been a constant presence in her life recently.
And even though she had tried to shut herself off, to protect herself from the vulnerability he brought, it was hard not to acknowledge that he had become a part of this strange new world she was starting to build. Tommy walked in with a quiet confidence, his boots heavy against the floor. But there was something different about him today. Something softer. Something Lena couldn't quite place, but it was there. He took a seat at the bar, his usual seat, and waited for her to meet his eyes. But Lena didn't move right away. She let the silence linger between them. This moment felt important, like the calm before the next wave. Finally, Lena met his gaze, and the weight of everything that had happened in the last few weeks seemed to press in on them both. "You okay?" Tommy's voice was low, but sincere. "I'm trying to be." She paused, placing the rag down on the counter, her fingers brushing the fabric. "I'm not sure what comes next, but I'm here. I think I'm finally here." Tommy's lips pressed into a small smile, and for a brief moment, it was like the world had softened around them. The weight of the past didn't disappear, but it didn't seem as heavy as it once did. They didn't need to fix everything right now. They just needed to keep going. Together. Lena's gaze shifted past Tommy, looking toward the door where Eli had just stepped back inside. The young man who had once been a small boy, the one she had left behind, was now standing before her. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, Lena felt the world shift once again. Eli looked uncertain, nervous even. It was as if he still couldn't quite believe that she was here, that he was here, and that the years of separation were finally over. But there was something else in his eyes too, something that had been absent the last time she saw him. Hope. Lena took a deep breath. She hadn't known how to face him, how to take those first steps towards reconnecting. How could she make up for lost time? How could she fix the years she had been absent from his life? She couldn't. But she could show him that she was here now. And that was enough. Lena wiped her hands on the apron and stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest, as she crossed the room towards him. Tommy, sensing the importance of the moment, stood up quietly, giving her the space she needed. When Lena reached Eli, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The moment was bigger than words. She opened her arms, and without hesitation, Eli stepped forward, his own arms wrapping around her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like home. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. This was the start of something new, and for the first time, Lena felt like she could finally breathe. "I'm sorry, Eli." Her voice was shaky, the words thick with emotion, but they were the words she had been holding back for so long. "I should have been there. I should have never left." Eli's arms tightened around her, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. But then he pulled back slightly, looking her in the eyes. "I'm not mad at you, Mom. I just wanted to know you." Lena blinked back tears, her chest tight with the weight of everything she had missed. "And I want to know you too. I want to make up for all the time we lost." There was no magic in that moment, no grand gesture. It was just a simple exchange of love, of forgiveness, of hope. And in that moment, Lena knew that this was just the beginning. As Lena and Eli shared the embrace, Tommy quietly watched from the side. His eyes softened as he took in the sight, but there was no sadness there, no regret, just a quiet pride. He had watched them both, Lena facing the ghosts of her past, and Eli trying to rebuild a connection with the woman who had once been his whole world. And he realized that this was something he could never fix. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about him at all. Tommy stepped forward, his presence a quiet reminder of the bond that he and Lena had formed over the past few weeks. The bond they had built through shared understanding and raw vulnerability. "I'm proud of you, Lena." Tommy's voice was steady, but the sincerity in it was unmistakable. "I know it wasn't easy, but you did it." Lena looked at Tommy, meeting his eyes with a sense of gratitude that she couldn't quite express in words. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, knowing that the connection they had formed was something that couldn't be undone. Tommy smiled softly and took a step back, giving them space. He had done what he could, helped her face the darkness of her past, and now it was time for her to find her own way forward. The night wore on, but the mood in the Copper Bell was lighter than it had been in weeks. Lena, Eli, and Tommy sat together at the bar, talking, really talking, for the first time in a long time. Lena told Eli about her time in the military, about the things she had seen and done, about the way she had tried to forget but could never quite escape. She explained the reasons she hadn't been there, and Eli listened. No judgment, no anger, just understanding. Tommy, too, shared his story with Eli, though in his own way. He didn't go into detail about the past he couldn't escape, but he spoke honestly about the man he had become and the journey he was still on. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And it was enough. What would you do if you were in Lena's position? Or how would you rebuild a relationship after so many years apart? If you want to see how Lena continues to move forward with her family and what happens next in her journey, subscribe now. Don't miss what's coming next.